The first time Adrienne Vale laughed at Caleb Whitaker's old radio, everyone heard it. Executives smiled behind glass walls. Investors lowered their coffee cups. A communications expert shook his head as if a night maintenance worker had carried a relic into the future. And beside Caleb, 8-year-old Nora slowly lowered her hand-painted cardboard radio, her cheeks burning as the CEO called her father's scratched receiver garage sale junk. Caleb said nothing. He only placed one steady hand over the radio, as if protecting something alive. Hours later, when a medical evacuation aircraft vanished inside a coastal storm, the million-dollar command suite began showing impossible locations. Experts argued. Screens froze. A donor heart was losing time. 2 nurses were trapped in the sky. A rescue helicopter was flying the wrong direction. Then Caleb's old radio crackled. 3 faint pulses. A hidden distress signal. And the man they had mocked looked up like he had heard a voice from a life he never talked about. Stay until the end, because what Caleb hears in that storm changes everything. And before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what your local time is. If stories about dignity, fatherhood, and hidden strength move you, subscribe and join us for the full journey. Before the sun rose over Charleston Harbor, Caleb Whitaker was already awake. He moved through the back corridor of Palmetto AirMed Logistics with a mop bucket, a ring of maintenance keys, and a silence that made him almost invisible. The facility was built from glass, steel, and money, a private medical transport hub where emergency aircraft lifted off for hospitals, islands, accident scenes, and coastal towns that needed help faster than roads could carry it. At night, though, it belonged to men like Caleb. He knew which hallway lights flickered before storms. He knew which hangar door groaned in cold wind. He knew where the backup generator coughed once before settling into rhythm. He knew the building not because anyone had taught him, but because he listened. Listening had always been his gift. Near the maintenance locker, on the bottom shelf beneath folded gray uniforms, sat an old shortwave radio with scratched black casing and a cracked leather strap. It looked out of place among spray bottles and work gloves, but Caleb treated it with the care another man might give a wedding ring. Every morning before leaving, he checked the dial, wiped dust from the speaker grill, and wrapped the strap twice around his hand. He never explained why. At 5:42 a.m., his phone buzzed. Nora, he answered before the second vibration. Daddy? Her voice was small, soft, with sleep. Caleb leaned against the locker, his tired eyes warming. I'm here, Bug. The school message said the bus is delayed. The road by Mrs. Palmer's house has water again. Caleb closed his eyes for 1 second. Outside, rain tapped against the high windows. The storm was supposed to come later, but Charleston weather never cared about schedules. Pack your backpack, he said gently. I'll come get you. And my project? A faint smile touched his face. Especially your project. 30 minutes later, Nora Whitaker sat in the passenger seat of Caleb's old pickup, hugging a cardboard radio made from a cereal box, bottle caps, foil, and blue paint. She had drawn tiny stars around the speaker and written Nora's signal finder across the top in crooked silver letters. It doesn't really work, she said, turning the paper dial with great seriousness. Caleb glanced over while stopping at a red light. Not every radio needs batteries, she frowned. That's not scientifically true. No, he said. But sometimes people make things because they want to believe someone is out there listening. Nora looked down at the cardboard radio. Her mother had loved little projects like that, paper boats, popsicle stick bridges, kitchen table inventions that made no sense and somehow mattered anyway. Caleb did not speak of Nora's mother often, not because he wanted to erase her, but because grief had a way of waking up if handled too roughly. Since the accident 3 years earlier, he had learned how to braid Nora's hair badly, pack lunches without forgetting fruit, stretch one paycheck across rent, school shoes, and medicine, and still show up every night with enough patience left to read one chapter from whatever library book she had chosen. He had not learned how to be both parents. He only kept trying. When they reached Palmetto AirMed, the facility had changed completely. The quiet night building had become a polished stage. Luxury cars lined the private entrance. News vans waited near the outer gate. Men in tailored suits hurried under black umbrellas. Women in sharp coats crossed the lobby with tablets pressed to their chests. A banner hung over the main command floor. Palmetto AirMed Digital Response Demonstration. The future of medical flight coordination. Caleb slowed near the employee entrance. Nora stared through the windshield. Is this where you fix things? Mostly things people don't notice. That sounds important. He looked at her, and for a moment, the rain, the debt, the exhaustion, and the long night behind him loosened their grip. It is, he said. Inside, he led her through a side hallway, away from the lobby. He had already decided to keep her in the break room until the bus route cleared or his neighbor could pick her up. Maintenance workers had received the memo the night before. Stay out of sight during the demonstration. No carts in executive corridors. No uniforms on the command floor. No distractions. Caleb understood what that meant. The future looked better without people like him in the frame. He opened the break room door and set Nora's backpack by a chair. She placed her cardboard radio carefully on the table, then noticed the old shortwave radio hanging from his shoulder. Can I bring mine if you bring yours? She asked. Caleb hesitated. For a second, his thumb brushed the cracked strap of the old radio. Something moved behind his eyes, something old and heavy, like storm clouds far out over water. Then he nodded. Just keep it close. From beyond the wall, applause rose from the command floor. The demonstration was beginning, and Caleb had no idea that before the day was over, every person in that building would be listening for the kind of signal only he could hear. Adrienne Vale believed every room had a center, and she had spent most of her life making sure she stood in it. At 43, she carried herself with the clean precision of someone who had never allowed exhaustion to show in public. Her dark navy suit looked tailored for movement, not comfort. Her silver watch flashed whenever she lifted her hand. Her voice could soften for donors, sharpen for contractors, and turn almost warm when cameras were nearby. To investors, she was the woman who had dragged Palmetto AirMed from a struggling regional service into one of the most advanced private medical transport companies on the East Coast. To her employees, she was brilliance wrapped in pressure. To herself, she was proof that weakness was expensive. That morning, she stood at the front of the glass-walled command floor while 36 guests watched a wall of monitors glow behind her. Flight maps, weather overlays, hospital transfer routes, aircraft diagnostics. Every screen moved with smooth digital confidence. This, Adrienne said, lifting one hand toward the display, is the future of emergency medical aviation. The investors nodded. A camera crew captured the angle. Near the rear console, Dr. Russell Keene smiled as if the future belonged partly to him. He was a nationally known communications consultant with silver hair, polished glasses, and the calm arrogance of a man who had spent years being paid to explain things to people already afraid of looking uninformed. The system removes uncertainty, he said. It integrates aircraft telemetry, GPS correction, digital beacon verification, and storm compensation into one unified response environment. A few investors murmured approval. Adrienne smiled. No one wanted to hear the old sounds anymore. Static, pulse tones, weak voices under bad weather, human listening. Those belonged to the past, to coast stations and paper charts, and tired operators holding coffee cups beside humming receivers. Adrienne had built her reputation by replacing the past. Beyond the glass, Caleb crossed the side corridor with a folded ladder under one arm and Nora close beside him. He kept his head lowered, hoping to move unseen to the maintenance alcove near the break room. But Nora, being 8, could not stop looking. The command floor looked like a spaceship to her. Blue lights rolled across the wall of screens. Aircraft icons moved over the Carolina coast. A model helicopter sat inside a display case. Men and women wore headsets and spoke in clipped, important voices. Nora hugged her cardboard radio to her chest. "Daddy," she whispered, "is that where they find the helicopters?" "Planes, too," Caleb murmured. "Keep walking." But the old shortwave radio slipped slightly from his shoulder as he adjusted the ladder. Its cracked casing knocked softly against the metal frame. A small sound. Not loud, but in polished rooms, humble things often sounded louder than they should. Adrienne turned. Her eyes found Caleb first, then the gray maintenance shirt, then the ladder, then the little girl holding a painted cereal box radio. Finally, her gaze landed on the scratched black receiver hanging from Caleb's shoulder. The smile on her face did not disappear. It changed. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, her voice carrying easily across the command floor. Caleb stopped. Several people turned. Dr. Keene glanced over his glasses. A pilot near the weather station paused, with one hand on his headset. Caleb lowered the ladder carefully. "Miss Vale." Adrienne walked toward the glass door and opened it herself, a gesture that looked generous until everyone saw the expression beneath it. "I thought maintenance had been asked to keep the corridors clear during the demonstration." "They were," Caleb said. "I'm moving equipment out of view." "And bringing guests?" Nora shifted behind her father. Caleb's voice stayed even. "Her school bus was delayed by flooding. She'll be in the break room until pickup." Adrienne looked at Nora, then at the cardboard radio. "What do we have there?" Nora swallowed. "It's my science project." "A radio?" Nora nodded, uncertain now. Adrienne crouched slightly, not enough to seem kind, only enough to inspect. How charming. Somewhere behind her, an investor smiled. Caleb saw Nora's fingers tighten around the box. He knew that kind of smile. The smile adults used when they wanted children to feel small without admitting they had aimed. Adrienne straightened and looked at Caleb's old receiver again. "And that one? Is that also for science class?" A few quiet chuckles moved across the command floor. Caleb did not answer immediately. His hand moved to the cracked leather strap. "It's mine," he said. Dr. Keene stepped closer, amused. "Shortwave analog receiver. Haven't seen one of those outside a hobbyist convention in years." Adrienne's eyes glittered. The demonstration had given her a perfect contrast. On one side, her wall of digital precision. On the other, a maintenance worker with a scratched old radio and a child holding a cardboard imitation. The future and the past. She knew which image sold better. "Well," she said, turning slightly so the room could hear, "perhaps we should keep the antique equipment away from the command suite. We're trying to reassure investors, not remind them of garage sales." The laughter came quickly this time. Not from everyone, but enough. Nora's face changed. Her cardboard radio lowered an inch. Caleb looked at his daughter, not at Adrienne. And in the glass reflection behind them, the storm clouds over Charleston Harbor grew darker. For a few seconds, Caleb Whitaker stood beneath the clean, white lights of the command floor with every eye on him. The ladder rested at his feet. The old radio hung against his chest. Nora stood half behind his right arm, holding her cardboard radio as though it had suddenly become something embarrassing. Adrienne Vale did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Wealth had a way of making quiet cruelty travel farther than shouting. "Garage sale junk," she said, glancing once more at Caleb's receiver. "That is what we spent millions replacing." A young technician near the weather console tried not to laugh and failed. One of the investors covered his smirk with the rim of a coffee cup. A nurse in flight uniform looked away, uncomfortable but silent. "Doctor." Russell Keene adjusted his polished glasses and gave a thin, professional smile. "In fairness, Doctor," Keene added, analog listening had its place. Museums, training demonstrations, nostalgia. But in live medical aviation, we prefer verified data over guesswork. The sentence landed harder than the laughter. Because it sounded educated. Because it sounded final. Because it made Caleb's silence look like ignorance instead of restraint. Nora looked up at her father. Caleb saw the question in her eyes, before she could ask it. Is he right? He wished, for one sharp moment, that childhood came with armor. Instead, children collected the reactions of adults and carried them inside themselves. A laugh at the wrong time could become a memory. A smirk could become a voice years later. Caleb knew that. He had heard men laugh at mechanics, janitors, dispatchers, deckhands, and line workers until emergencies made those same men beg for help. Still, he did not correct them. Not in front of Nora. Not like this. He bent slightly, picked up the ladder, and placed one hand gently over the top of Nora's cardboard radio. "Come on, Bug," he said. Nora's mouth tightened. "Daddy, why did they laugh?" The command floor quieted just enough for several people to hear. Adrienne's expression shifted, but only slightly. Caleb looked down at his daughter. His voice remained low, steady, and clear. Because some people think the shine on a thing tells them what it's worth. Nora looked at the old receiver against his chest. "And it doesn't?" "No," Caleb said. "Dignity is louder than an insult. You just don't have to shout it." The words did not sound dramatic. They sounded practiced, as if Caleb had said them to himself in empty hallways, in grocery store lines, beside unpaid bills, after job interviews where people read his work history and never asked what came before it. A woman near the rear console lowered her eyes. Dr. Keene's smile thinned. Adrienne, however, did not step back. She had built an empire on forward motion, and the smallest challenge to her polished certainty felt like resistance. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, "this facility is hosting partners who fund real emergency operations. Please take the maintenance equipment and the school project somewhere appropriate." Caleb nodded once. No anger, no apology, just a controlled, almost painful calm. He lifted the ladder again and guided Nora toward the side corridor. Behind them, the demonstration resumed, but the room did not regain its earlier ease. Something human had entered the glass and steel. Something inconvenient. Nora walked slowly. At the doorway, she looked back once at the wall of glowing screens, then down at the cardboard radio in her hands. The silver letters she had drawn across the front had smudged slightly from her fingers. Nora's signal finner. Caleb saw it. He said nothing until they reached the service hall. Only then did he kneel in front of her. The hallway smelled faintly of disinfectant, rainwater, and machine oil. Through the wall, Adrienne's voice rose again, smooth and confident, describing response times, digital redundancy, investor expansion, and the future of medical flight. Nora blinked fast, refusing tears. "I worked hard on it," she whispered. "I know. It's not junk." Caleb's face softened. "No," he said, "it's not." She made it sound stupid. Caleb looked toward the command floor doors. His jaw tightened once, then relaxed. She made herself sound certain. That's not the same thing as being right. Right. Nora studied him with the serious eyes of a child who had learned too early that adults could be unfair. "Why didn't you tell them?" "Tell them what?" "That your radio matters." Caleb's hand rested on the old receiver. For a moment, his thumb found a deep scratch along the side of the casing, a mark from another storm, another night, another voice fighting through static. Then he looked back at Nora. Because proving yourself to someone who wants to laugh is not always worth the cost. She absorbed that quietly. Then, from the ceiling speakers, a soft chime sounded, the facility-wide alert tone. Not urgent yet, but sharp enough to make Caleb lift his head. A weather advisory appeared on a small monitor mounted near the corridor corner. Coastal storm activity intensifying, wind shear warnings, low visibility across outer barrier routes. From the command floor, applause faded into a murmur. A dispatcher's voice came over the intercom. "Medical Flight 6, launch window confirmed. Donor transport from St. Anne's Coastal to Charleston Memorial. All departments stand by." Caleb stood slowly. Beyond the service hall window, rain swept across the tarmac in silver lines. At the far hangar, a medical aircraft waited, with its lights blinking through the storm haze. Nora hugged her cardboard radio tighter. "Daddy," she asked, "are they flying in that?" Caleb watched the aircraft's beacon pulse against the darkening morning. "Yes," he said. And somewhere beneath the clean confidence of the facility, beneath the digital maps and polished speeches, the old radio at Caleb's side gave a faint crackle. One soft breath of static. Then silence. Medical Flight 6 rolled out of the hangar at 8:17 a.m. Its white fuselage shone under the rain like bone beneath a gray sky. Blue emergency lights blinked along the wingtips. A ground crewman in a reflective jacket jogged backward, guiding the aircraft through sheets of water while wind pushed at his shoulders. Inside the command floor, Adrienne Vale stood before her investors with her confidence restored. The storm, to her, had become opportunity. This is exactly why Palmetto AirMed invested in full-spectrum digital coordination, she said, gesturing toward the enormous display. A donor heart is being transferred from St. Anne's Coastal Hospital to Charleston Memorial. Roads are flooding. Conventional transport is too slow, but our aviation network can maintain route integrity under pressure. On the main screen, the aircraft appeared as a clean green icon moving toward the coast. Beside it, a countdown clock tracked the donor heart's transport window. 2 hours, 12 minutes. Plenty of time if everything worked. Not enough if anything went wrong. Dr. Russell Keene stood at a nearby console, speaking quietly to a group of executives. The aircraft's beacon is tied into our corrected GPS layer. Even in storm interference, the system filters signal noise and prioritizes verified telemetry. One investor nodded, another raised his phone to record. Adrienne noticed and smiled. Across the hall, Caleb stood on a maintenance stool beneath an access panel, pretending to tighten a loose cable he had already fixed 3 weeks earlier. Nora sat in the break room doorway with her backpack at her feet, her cardboard radio resting in her lap. She had stopped crying, but her face still carried the quiet stiffness of a child trying to act older than she was. Caleb hated that look. He had seen it too often since Nora's mother died. Children should not have to become careful just because adults had become cruel. He turned a screw slowly, then paused. The old radio on the shelf beside him gave another faint crackle. Not storm static. Not ordinary interference. Caleb looked down. The sound came again, thin and broken, buried under a wash of rain noise. 3 uneven bursts. Then a hollow pause. His hand stopped on the screwdriver. Nora noticed immediately. "Daddy?" Caleb raised one finger gently, asking for quiet. He stepped down from the stool, wiped his hand on his work pants, and lifted the old receiver. The cracked leather strap slid across his wrist like something familiar finding its place. He turned the dial barely a fraction. Static thickened, then thinned, then folded into a low pulsing tone. Caleb's expression changed so slightly that most people would have missed it, but Nora did not. She had spent years studying her father's face for signs of bills, grief, headaches, and hidden worry. "What is it?" she whispered. Caleb listened another moment. Outside, Medical Flight 6 lifted from the runway, wheels rising into storm haze. The command floor applauded. Caleb did not move. The pulse returned. Short, long, then nothing. His eyes shifted toward the glass wall, where the aircraft icon continued smoothly over the digital map. Too smooth. Storm bands rolled across the radar layer, but the icon did not wobble. It moved with perfect confidence through weather that should have made every signal fight for clarity. Caleb set the screwdriver down. "Nora," he said softly, "stay here." He walked to the side entrance of the command floor and found a young technician named Marisol Avery standing near the backup systems cabinet. She had always been kind to him, the kind of person who said thank you when maintenance restored heat to an office no one else noticed was cold. "Marisol," Caleb said. She turned, distracted. "Caleb, not now. They're live." "I know. I heard something on the lower band." Her eyes flicked to the old radio. Not mocking, but nervous. You should keep that out of sight. The storm is bending something. Flight 6's backup beacon may not show where the aircraft actually is. Marisol frowned. The system compensates for storm drift. It compensates for clean drift, Caleb said, not layered reflection off coastal bands. If the aircraft drops behind the outer storm wall, the suite may trust the echo. She stared at him, trying to decide whether he sounded crazy or terrifyingly specific. Behind her, Dr. Keene noticed the exchange. His face hardened. "Is there a problem?" he asked, walking over. Marisol straightened. "No, Dr. Keene. Caleb just thought he heard—" "Maintenance heard something?" Keene interrupted. Caleb looked at him calmly. "A pulse pattern. It may be nothing. But if the beacon starts repeating through reflection, your verified data could be verifying the wrong source." Dr. Keene blinked once, then smiled as if Caleb had handed him a small, amusing object. "Mr. Whitaker, this system is not a kitchen radio. It does not chase ghosts." Caleb did not react to the insult. He only looked past Keene at the main screen. The green aircraft icon flickered. Once. So quickly that no one else seemed to notice. Then a dispatcher leaned forward at her console. "Command," she said, voice tightening. "Medical Flight 6 just missed a scheduled voice check." Adrienne turned. The room sharpened. Dr. Keene's smile disappeared. On the wall, the green icon froze for half a second. Then it jumped. At first, no one called it a crisis. That was how fear entered expensive rooms. Quietly, the green icon representing Medical Flight 6 paused over the coastal map, then resumed its movement as if nothing had happened. On the command floor, several technicians leaned closer to their screens. A dispatcher repeated the missed voice check with professional calm. "Medical Flight 6, Palmetto Command. Confirm status." Static answered. Not the soft hiss of distance. A rough, broken scrape. The kind of sound that made people stop breathing without knowing why. Adrienne Vale moved toward the main console, her heels clicking once, twice, then stopping. "Is that storm interference?" Dr. Keene adjusted his glasses. "Most likely. The digital beacon is still active." And the aircraft icon glowed green. Green meant safe. Green meant tracked. Green meant the investors would not panic. But on another screen, the weather layer deepened, from yellow to orange. A storm cell crawled across the outer coastal route like a bruise spreading under skin. The dispatcher tried again. "Medical Flight 6, confirm altitude and heading." A voice broke through for less than a second. "Command, we have—" Then the transmission vanished under static. A nurse near the back of the room covered her mouth. One of the investors lowered his phone. The countdown clock continued to run. 2 hours, 1 minute. The donor heart did not care about weather, investment rounds, or public demonstrations. It only had time, and time was draining away in clean digital numbers. Caleb stood near the side entrance, with the old radio held low against his hip. Nora watched from the corridor, her cardboard radio pressed flat to her chest. She understood very little about aircraft or donor organs, but she understood adult faces. She saw the moment confidence became acting. A flight coordinator called out, "Telemetry is showing position stable, heading northeast, speed normal." Another technician frowned. "Secondary altitude reading doesn't match." Dr. Keene stepped in quickly. "Prioritize corrected GPS. The storm is corrupting raw backup feeds." Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. There it was. The first wrong choice. Not dramatic, not loud, just a confident hand selecting the prettier lie. He listened again to the old receiver. Static rolled across it in waves. Beneath the noise came a faint pulse, then another, then a longer one trailing weakly into the storm. It was not clean enough to prove anything to people who trusted screens more than ears. But Caleb had heard signals like this before, carried over violent weather, bounced off water, bent around storm walls, made strange by distance and fear. Nora took one step closer. "Daddy, is someone talking?" Caleb did not look away from the radio, trying to. On the command floor, The main display suddenly divided into two possible aircraft positions. One remained along the approved route. The other blinked far east, near a chain of barrier islands half hidden beneath the storm overlay. A technician whispered, "That can't be right." Adrienne heard him. "What can't be right?" "It's showing a duplicate beacon return." Dr. Keene was already moving. "Reflection artifact. Suppress it. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2." Caleb stepped forward. "Don't suppress it." The words were not loud, but they cut through the room because they came from the wrong man. Several faces turned. Dr. Keene looked over slowly. "Excuse me?" Caleb kept his gaze on the map. "If the system is seeing two positions, one may be the aircraft and one may be the echo. You need to test which one carries live drift." Keene's face tightened with public irritation. "And you determine this with your antique?" Caleb ignored the tone. "The pulse I'm hearing doesn't match the green track." A small smirk appeared on the face of the investor who had laughed earlier. Adrienne saw it, but this time she did not smile with him. Her eyes stayed on the two blinking positions. The dispatcher tried again. "Medical Flight 6, Palmetto Command. If you read, transmit ident." A broken fragment came through the room speakers. "Icing visibility nurse oxygen." Then static swallowed the voice whole. A critical care nurse standing near the demonstration guests turned pale. "There are two nurses on that plane." Adrienne looked at her. The nurse continued, voice shaking despite her effort to control it. "One is managing the heart cooler. The other is assisting the pilot if cabin pressure alarms trigger. If they're fighting oxygen support and navigation at the same time." She did not finish. She did not need to. On the wall, the donor heart countdown dropped below 2 hours. 1 hour, 59 minutes. The room changed. The investors were no longer watching a demonstration. They were witnessing liability, fear, and human life compressed into a blinking green icon. Adrienne's phone vibrated in her hand. A hospital director calling. She did not answer. Dr. Keene touched the console and forced the display back to a single track. "There," he said. "False return removed." The map looked cleaner. The room did not feel safer. Caleb looked at the screen, then at his old radio. 3 faint pulses returned. Farther away now. Weaker. He turned slightly toward Nora. Her small fingers rested on the paper dial of her cardboard radio, as if she too could help tune the dark. Caleb looked back at the command floor. And this time, the old radio gave a sound that made his face go still. Not static. Not echo. A distressed tone. Buried, fading, and real. Caleb heard the tone twice before he moved. The first pulse was almost swallowed by the storm. The second came thinner, stretched like a wire pulled too hard. He looked through the glass at the command floor where Dr. Russell Keene had just cleaned the display by removing the duplicate aircraft position. The map looked confident again. The green icon continued along the approved route, bright and obedient, as if fear could be erased by hiding what did not fit. Caleb knew better. Some signals did not disappear because they were false. Sometimes they disappeared because no one wanted the truth to be inconvenient. He stepped fully onto the command floor. A few people turned with immediate discomfort. A maintenance worker crossing into the center of an executive demonstration felt like mud tracked across white marble. Dr. Keene saw him first. "Mr. Whitaker, we are managing an active aviation event." Caleb stopped a respectful distance from the console. "That's why I'm speaking." Adrienne Vale looked from Caleb to the old radio in his hand. Her face still held authority, but her eyes had lost some of their shine. "You have something useful?" she asked. Keene answered before Caleb could. "He has static." Caleb did not flinch. "I have a distressed tone under the static." The room tightened. Nora stood just beyond the glass, one hand pressed to the doorframe, her cardboard radio tucked beneath her arm. She was small against the tall walls and glowing screens, but Caleb felt her there, as clearly as if she were holding his sleeve. He took one slow breath. "The system is trusting a reflected signal," he said. The aircraft beacon is bouncing off the storm wall and water. Your corrected track is not the plane. It's the echo pretending to be the voice. A young technician stared at the map. The metaphor landed where the jargon had not. An echo pretending to be the voice. Adrienne's expression changed, almost imperceptibly. Dr. Keene gave a short laugh. That is a colorful explanation, but not a valid operational diagnosis. Caleb turned the old radio slightly, angling the speaker toward the console. The static hissed. Under it, faint and irregular, came 3 strained pulses. Short, short, long. No one laughed now, but Keene's pride was faster than his fear. Distortion can imitate patterns, he said, especially on obsolete receivers. This is precisely why modern systems filter human interpretation out of emergency response. Human interpretation is how you know when the machine is lying, Caleb said quietly. The words dropped hard. Several heads turned toward Keene. Adrienne's jaw tightened. She did not like Caleb's tone, not because it was rude, but because it was calm. Men begging for attention were easy to dismiss. Men who sounded certain without needing permission were harder. Keene moved to the console. We are not redirecting a rescue based on maintenance intuition. The word maintenance carried all the contempt he had not put into his voice. Caleb's gaze stayed steady. Then test live drift. Ask Flight 6 for a manual ident. If the pulse shifts with the storm rhythm, it's the real aircraft. If it holds clean, it's reflection. The dispatcher hesitated, looking toward Adrienne. Keene cut in. No, we will maintain corrected GPS and deploy according to verified location. Caleb looked at Adrienne. If you send rescue to the green track, they'll search empty weather. The room seemed to lean toward her. This was the moment leadership was supposed to mean vision, confidence, decision, end quote. But Adrienne was aware of cameras, investors, contracts, hospital partners, liability, and the humiliation of letting a janitor with an old radio challenge the consultant she had paid a fortune to bring in. Her eyes shifted once to Nora at the doorway. The child was watching. That made Adrienne's face harden again, as if softness in public were a weakness she could not afford. Mr. Whitaker, she said, take your daughter back to the break room. Nora's fingers tightened around the cardboard radio. Caleb stood very still. Miss Vale, he said, there are people in that aircraft, and there are certified professionals responsible for them. Dr. Keene nodded sharply. Security can assist if needed. The sentence brought a strange silence. Not the silence of respect, the silence before a man is removed in front of his child. Caleb looked once at Nora. Her eyes were wide, not frightened exactly, but wounded. She had watched them laugh at him. Now, she was watching them ignore him. Somewhere inside her, a lesson was forming, and Caleb knew he had to be careful what lesson it became. He lowered the radio. He did not argue. He did not plead. He turned toward the door. As he reached Nora, she whispered so quietly, only he heard. But Daddy, voices in the dark still matter. Caleb stopped. The cardboard radio in her arms was bent at one corner from where she had held it too tightly. Silver paint from the words Nora's signal finder had smudged onto her thumb. He looked down at that thumb, at the small, stubborn belief of a child who had made a radio that could not receive anything, yet still believed listening mattered. Behind them, Dr. Keene gave an instruction. Lock rescue vector to corrected GPS. Suppress all non-verified returns. The main screen obeyed. The second aircraft position vanished. A rescue helicopter icon turned south toward the clean green track. Caleb stared at the screen through the glass. Then the old radio crackled again. A broken voice surfaced beneath the storm. Palmetto, wrong. Water below, light, failure. The transmission dissolved. No one on the command floor heard it clearly. Caleb did. Nora did too. Her face changed. Daddy, she whispered. On the wall, the rescue helicopter moved farther from the truth. The rescue helicopter turned south. On the command floor, its icon moved with clean digital certainty toward the green track Dr. Keene had approved. The route line glowed across the main screen, like a promise. To anyone watching from a distance, the system looked calm, organized, and in control. Caleb knew it was wrong. He stood outside the glass with Nora beside him, the old radio low in his hands. Rain dragged silver lines down the windows. Beyond the facility, Charleston Harbor had disappeared behind a wall of gray water and wind. Inside the command center, Adrienne Vale was speaking to Charleston Memorial's transplant director. Her posture was straight, but her free hand gripped the edge of the console hard enough to pale her knuckles. "We have contact with beacon tracking," she said. "Rescue is en route." It was not exactly a lie. It was worse. It was confidence built on a mistake. The donor heart countdown dropped to 1 hour and 46 minutes. A nurse near the back whispered, "They need that heart prepped in the operating room before the window collapses." No one answered, because everyone understood what she meant. Somewhere in Charleston, a patient was waiting beneath bright surgical lights, already open to hope. A family was waiting in a hallway with paper cups of untouched coffee. Doctors were watching a clock. And above the coast, 2 nurses and 1 pilot were fighting weather, failing instruments, and the cold knowledge that rescue might be searching the wrong sky. Caleb turned the dial of his old radio a fraction. Static rose. He closed his eyes. Nora watched him with complete stillness. To most people, static was noise. To Caleb, it had shape. It leaned. It dragged. It broke in patterns. Storm static rolled like gravel. Engine interference shivered. Reflected beacon signals had a hollow quality, like hearing someone shout from behind a wall. The real signal was underneath. Weak, moving, alive. He walked down the service hall to a storage alcove where backup cleaning supplies were stacked beside folded evacuation chairs. It was the only place close enough to the command floor antenna conduit and far enough from people who wanted him invisible. Nora followed without being told. Caleb set the old radio on an overturned crate. He pulled a small screwdriver from his pocket and opened the rear panel with practiced care. Nora placed her cardboard radio beside it. The 2 radios looked impossible together. One battered by storms and years. One made of cereal box cardboard and hope. "Can mine help?" Nora asked. Caleb looked at the little painted box, then at his daughter. "It already is." She did not understand, but she stood a little taller. On the command floor, voices rose. "Rescue 1 is approaching search area," a dispatcher called. No visual. Dr. Keene replied sharply. "Expand grid, south, southeast." Caleb's jaw tightened. Wrong again. He clipped a short length of spare copper wire from the maintenance shelf and wrapped it around the old radio's antenna base. Then he lifted the wire toward the metal conduit running above the alcove. Nora whispered, "Is that allowed?" "No." "Is it dangerous?" "Not if I'm careful." She looked toward the glass doors where security officers had begun watching the hall. "Will you get in trouble?" Caleb paused. There were many answers. Yes, probably. Yes, because men like him always got in trouble faster than men in suits. Yes, because saving strangers rarely came with permission. But Nora did not need bitterness. She needed truth. "Sometimes," he said, "trouble is what people call it before they understand why you did it." The radio hissed, then dipped. A tone emerged. Short, short, long. Then a fragment of voice. "Altimeter unreliable, island lights, fuel." Caleb grabbed a notepad from the shelf and wrote quickly. "Island lights, fuel, wrong vector." Nora stared. That was them. "Yes." "Can you tell the people?" "I tried." "Try again." Her voice was simple. Not dramatic. Not heroic. Just a child asking her father to be the kind of man he had taught her to believe in. Caleb looked through the glass at the command floor. Dr. Keene stood over the consoles like a man protecting his reputation from the weather itself. Adrienne paced behind him, speaking into 2 phones now. Investors had stopped filming. One had turned away, murmuring to a legal advisor. Another held a contract folder closed against his chest. The future of Palmetto AirMed was beginning to look very fragile. But Caleb was not thinking about Palmetto. He was thinking about a pilot's voice under static, a nurse managing oxygen in a shaking cabin, a heart in a cooler, a patient waiting, and Nora watching. A security officer stepped into the service hall. "Mr. Whitaker." Caleb kept writing. "Mr. Whitaker, Miss Vale wants you away from the command area." Nora moved closer to her father. The officer's eyes dropped to the opened radio, the copper wire, the notes. "What are you doing?" Caleb lifted the old receiver just as the hidden tone surfaced again, clearer now through the improvised antenna. For 1 second, even the security officer heard it. A voice broke through. "Palmetto, this is Flight 6. We are north of Morris. Repeat, north." Static swallowed the rest. The officer froze. Inside the command floor, the rescue helicopter icon continued south. Away from them, away from the aircraft, away from the people waiting to be found. Caleb looked at the security officer. "Get Miss Vale," he said quietly. "Now." The security officer did not move at first. He stood in the service hallway with rain light flashing across his face, staring at Caleb Whitaker's opened radio as if the scratched little machine had become something alive. A moment earlier, the man had come to remove a maintenance worker from a restricted area. Now he had heard a voice that the $1 million command suite had missed. "North of Morris," the officer whispered. Caleb was already turning the dial back, searching for the signal before the storm folded over it again. "Tell Miss Vale." The officer looked through the glass wall at the command floor. Adrienne Vale was still on the phone, her expression carved into control. "Doctor." Keene stood over a console, telling the rescue helicopter to widen its southern search grid. The officer swallowed. Then he went. Nora stood very close to Caleb, her cardboard radio pressed against her sweater. "Did he believe you?" Caleb kept listening. He believed what he heard. "That's different?" "Sometimes it's all people know how to believe." Inside the command center, the officer approached Adrienne carefully. Caleb could not hear the words, but he saw the effect. Adrienne's head turned sharply toward the hallway. Her eyes found Caleb. Then the opened radio. Then Nora. Dr. Keene noticed. "What is it now?" he asked. Adrienne did not answer him immediately. She walked toward the glass door with the security officer beside her, her phone still glowing unanswered in her hand. When she stepped into the hall, the difference between her world and Caleb's seemed suddenly absurd. Her tailored suit, his damp maintenance shirt, her polished heels, his work boots, streaked with dust. Her company's future glowing behind glass. His old radio balanced on a crate beside a child's cardboard project. The storm pressed hard against the windows. The countdown clock continued dropping on the wall behind her. 1 hour, 38 minutes. Adrienne spoke first. "Officer Raines says he heard Flight 6. Caleb nodded once. "A fragment." "North of Morris?" That's what came through. Dr. Keene appeared behind her, his face flushed with irritation. "That is impossible. Rescue 1 is already sweeping the verified search corridor." Caleb looked past him to the wall screen. "The corridor is wrong." Keene exhaled sharply. "You keep saying that with absolutely no authorized diagnostic basis." Caleb picked up his notepad and held it out. Keene did not take it. Adrienne did. On the page, Caleb had written times beside fragments. Wrong water below, island lights, fuel, north of Morris. Beneath that, he had sketched 3 rough signal arcs and 1 storm band bending inland. Adrienne stared at the handwriting. It was precise, not frantic, not guessing. Dr. Keene glanced at it and scoffed. "This is not evidence. This is a doodle." Nora looked up quickly, hurt flashing across her face. Caleb's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed controlled. "In 90 seconds, he said, your green track will jump again." Keene went still. Caleb continued. "The system is chasing reflection off the moving storm wall. When that wall shifts inland, your verified track will shift with it because it isn't locked on the aircraft. It's locked on the echo. Adrienne's eyes lifted from the notepad. How sure are you? Caleb looked at the radio, then at the main display behind her. Sure enough that every minute you wait sends rescue farther away. Keen laughed once, but it came out thinner than before. This is reckless theater. Caleb did not look at him. Then, wait 90 seconds. The hallway became painfully quiet. Adrienne turned toward the command floor. Everyone inside had begun watching. Dispatchers, pilots, nurses, investors, camera crew, technicians. Even the people pretending not to stare were staring through the reflection of the glass. No one spoke. The green aircraft icon moved along the southern search corridor. Smooth. Stable. Approved. 30 seconds passed. The rescue helicopter reported again. Palmetto Command. Rescue 1 has no visual, no beacon lock in assigned grid. Dr. Keen gripped the back of a chair. Continue south-southeast. Increase sweep radius. Caleb watched the storm layer. Nora watched Caleb. Her cardboard radio rested against her chest, the silver letters catching the blue glow from the monitors. Nora's signal thinner. 60 seconds. Adrienne's phone vibrated again. Charleston Memorial. She rejected the call without looking. 75 seconds. A young technician whispered, "The coastal band just shifted." Keen snapped, "Do not adjust track without my order." 88 seconds. The green aircraft icon flickered. 90. It jumped inland. Not slightly, not subtly. The clean, verified location leapt several miles west, placing Medical Flight 6 over a stretch of marsh and highway where no aircraft could possibly be flying at its reported altitude. A sound moved through the command floor. Not a gasp. Something smaller. A collective failure of breath. The rescue helicopter pilot came over the speaker. "Palmetto, your target just moved onto land. Confirm. We are not seeing anything out here." Dr. Keen's hand froze above the console. Adrienne turned slowly toward Caleb. For the first time all morning, she did not look powerful. She looked afraid. Caleb did not use the moment to shame her. He did not say, "I told you." He did not look at Nora to make sure she had seen him proven right. He simply said, "You still have time to turn them north." Keen found his voice. "Miss Vale, if we alter course based on this and he's wrong, if I'm right," Caleb interrupted softly, "they live." The sentence left nothing for the room to hide behind. Adrienne looked through the glass at the donor heart countdown, at the frozen technicians, at the investors who no longer cared about the demonstration, and at Nora, whose small face held a kind of faith Adrienne had not earned from anyone in years. She breathed in. Then she said the words as if they cost her something. "Give him one chance." Dr. Keen turned toward her. "Adrienne." "One?" she repeated. "Colder now. Under your supervision." Caleb lifted the radio from the crate. The storm cracked against the windows. And inside the command floor, every screen waited for the man they had laughed at. Caleb did not rush into the command floor. That was the first thing everyone noticed. A man desperate to prove himself would have moved fast, spoken loudly, claimed space before it vanished. Caleb did none of that. He lifted the old radio in one hand, held Nora's gaze for a quiet second, then stepped through the glass door as if entering a place where fear needed steadier hands, not louder voices. The room parted awkwardly. No one knew whether to respect him yet, but no one laughed. Adrienne Vale stood near the main console, her arms folded tightly, the posture of a woman trying to hold her authority together by force. "Doctor." Russell Keen hovered beside the lead station, offended by every inch Caleb moved closer. "You will not touch primary routing," Keen said. Caleb looked at the wall display. The false green track still pulsed inland. The rescue helicopter icon remained far south, burning time. The donor heart countdown had slipped to 1 hour and 32 minutes. "I don't need primary routing," Caleb said. Keen blinked. "Then what exactly do you need?" Caleb placed the old radio gently on the side console, not the lead chair. He did not sit. He did not take the headset from the dispatcher. He did not pretend the room belonged to him. 3 things, he said. Adrienne's eyes narrowed. Say them. First, silence on the floor for 30 seconds when I ask for it. Not quiet, silence. Several technicians exchanged glances. Second, manual access to the backup coastal antenna array. Keene immediately shook his head. That array is obsolete. It's an emergency relic. Caleb looked at him. That's why it may still hear what your filtered system threw away. The words landed without force, which made them worse. Adrienne asked, Third? Caleb glanced toward the rescue helicopter icon. Call Rescue 1 now. Tell them to prepare for a northern redirect before they run out of useful fuel. The dispatcher looked to Adrienne. Keene stepped forward. This is operationally irresponsible. Caleb finally turned to him fully. His face held no anger, only focus. The aircraft is not lost, he said. Your system is listening to the storm's copy instead of the real cry for help. No one spoke. Even Adrienne seemed caught by the simplicity of it. The storm's copy. The real cry. Caleb pointed once to the map. The false signal is clean because it is reflection. The real one is dirty because it's fighting through weather, water, low altitude, and failing power. You trusted the pretty signal. A young technician lowered his eyes. Dr. Keene's mouth tightened. Adrienne looked at the dispatcher. Contact Rescue 1. Prepare for possible redirect. Do not execute until confirmed. The dispatcher nodded and began speaking into her headset. Keene stared at Adrienne as if she had betrayed reason itself. She did not look back. Manual antenna access, she said. A technician unlocked a secondary panel near the back wall. Dust lined its edges. Unlike the polished digital consoles, this cabinet had physical switches, faded labels, and a narrow signal meter that glowed dull amber when powered on. Caleb approached it slowly. His hand hovered for half a second over the controls. Not uncertain. Remembering. Nora watched from the hallway through the glass. Her cardboard radio rested against the window now, its painted dial turned toward her father. Caleb saw the reflection. For one moment, the cardboard radio and the old receiver lined up in the glass. One made by a child who believed in listening. One carried by a man who had spent years trying not to remember why he could. He turned the first switch. The amber meter trembled awake. Static filled the command floor speakers. Several people flinched. Keene muttered, Noise. Caleb raised one finger. Silence now. Adrienne looked around the room. Everyone, quiet. The effect was immediate and strange. The command floor, full of machines and money and educated fear, surrendered to a sound most of them had spent their careers filtering out. Static. Rain against glass. A monitor fan humming. A coffee cup being set down too carefully. Caleb leaned toward the panel and adjusted the backup antenna, heading by small increments. His fingers moved with intimate precision, not like a maintenance worker guessing, not like a hobbyist searching, like a man returning to an instrument he had once trusted with lives. The static changed. A faint tone rose, bent, disappeared. Caleb adjusted again. The signal meter twitched. He turned to the dispatcher. Ask Rescue 1 to hold transmission for 5 seconds. I need the band clean. She looked to Adrienne. Adrienne nodded. The dispatcher relayed the order. 5 seconds opened. No helicopter chatter. No executive breathing. No expert correction. Only the storm. Then, through the old speaker system, beneath the hiss and crackle, a human voice surfaced. Palmetto, Flight 6, fuel critical, north of Morris, emergency light visible. Repeat. The voice broke apart, but it had been enough. A nurse began to cry silently near the back wall. The dispatcher's hand froze over her keyboard. Adrienne stared at the speaker as if it had accused her. Caleb did not pause. Redirect Rescue 1 north-northeast, he said. Tell them to search low over the barrier edge. Look for intermittent red emergency light, not beacon lock. Keene stepped toward the console. That voice could still be distorted. Caleb cut him off with quiet steel. Dr. Keene, if you bury that signal again, they may die while you're protecting your certainty. The room did not move. Adrienne turned to the dispatcher. Redirect, Rescue 1. The dispatcher transmitted the order. On the wall, the helicopter icon began to turn. For the first time all morning, it moved toward the truth. Rescue 1 turned north. The small helicopter icon on the wall display shifted away from the polished green lie and began cutting across the storm map toward the dark chain of barrier islands. The movement was tiny on the screen, almost delicate, but everyone in the command floor understood what it meant. They had stopped trusting certainty. They had started chasing a voice. Caleb stood at the backup antenna panel with the old radio beside him and the facility's forgotten analog array trembling under his fingertips. Static rolled through the speakers in rough waves. He adjusted one faded dial, waited, then adjusted another. The signal meter jumped, then sank. Dr. Keene hovered behind him, no longer speaking, but not yet humbled. His silence had edges. He watched Caleb's hands, like a man searching for a mistake he could use to reclaim the room. Adrienne Vale stood several feet away, her phone hanging uselessly in one hand. For the first time since the demonstration began, she was not performing confidence. She was listening. The dispatcher leaned toward her headset. Rescue 1, Palmetto Command, new search priority, north-northeast of Morris. Look for intermittent emergency light near barrier edge. Beacon lock may be unreliable. A burst of rotor-washed static answered. Palmetto, Rescue 1 copies. Fuel becoming a factor. We have limited time in this weather. The donor heart countdown dropped to 1 hour and 24 minutes. The numbers glowed white. Cold. Indifferent. Nora watched from the hallway, one palm on the glass. Her cardboard radio rested against her chest, its bent corner pressed flat by her fingers. Caleb did not look at her often, but he felt her every second. Her belief was there like a light behind him. The old radio cracked. A voice surfaced. Cabin light failing. Nurse is stable. Heart cooler, secure. Then the storm tore it apart. A critical care nurse on the command floor closed her eyes in relief. They still have the heart. Caleb turned his head slightly. Tell Rescue 1 the aircraft may be lower than reported. If the pilot is fighting instrument failure, he'll stay beneath the worst wind but lose clean line of sight. The dispatcher repeated it. Dr. Keene could not help himself. You cannot know altitude from fragments. Caleb kept his hand on the dial. I'm not reading altitude. I'm reading how the signal scrapes. A technician frowned. Scrapes? Caleb spoke without looking away. Clean high signals skip. Low desperate ones drag. This one is dragging across water and metal. He's low. The explanation was strange, but the room understood the image. A voice dragging across water. A pilot trying to stay alive beneath the storm. Adrienne looked at the map again, and something in her face tightened with shame. The green, false track still glowed inland. Absurd now. A perfect digital mistake. Her beautiful system had not failed because it was useless. It had failed because everyone had loved its confidence too much, including her. Caleb adjusted the antenna angle another degree. The pulse came back stronger. Short, short, long. Then a broken voice. Red light, manual beacon weak, can't hold heading. Caleb pointed toward the weather overlay. They're being pushed west. Rescue 1 needs to sweep from the waterline inward, not from the false route outward. The dispatcher relayed it. Rescue 1 responded. Palmetto, visibility near zero. We are searching for light. No visual, yet. The room held its breath. A monitor beeped. Someone's pen rolled off a desk and hit the floor. No one picked it up. Nora whispered from the hallway. Come on. Caleb heard her, though she was behind glass. His fingers moved again. This time, he changed not the frequency, but the listening angle, borrowing the facility's antenna array and the old receiver together, one modern enough to reach, one old enough to hear what filters rejected. Static thinned. The command speakers popped. Then the pilot's voice came through clearer than before. Palmetto, Flight 6. We see shoreline. Emergency light cycling. Fuel critical. 2 souls crew. 2 medical. Heart secure. The command floor changed. Not loudly. A few shoulders dropped. The nurse, who had been crying, pressed both hands to her mouth. Adrienne took one step forward, as though moving closer to the voice could protect it. Caleb leaned toward the microphone near the dispatcher. Flight 6, this is Palmetto Command Relay, he said, his voice quiet but carrying. If you can hear, cycle your emergency light twice, then hold dark for 5 seconds. Dr. Keene stared at him. You're speaking directly to them? Caleb did not answer. Everyone waited. Through the speakers came static. Then Rescue 1's pilot shouted, Palmetto, we have intermittent red flashes. 2 cycles. Repeating, 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 repeating. We have visual contact with red emergency light. A sound rose from the room. Not celebration. Not yet. It was relief trying not to become hope too soon. Adrienne's eyes closed for half a second. The donor heart countdown continued falling. 1 hour, 19 minutes. Rescue 1 spoke again, voice strained by wind. Aircraft appears down near sandbar edge. We see movement. Need landing assessment. Weather is ugly. Caleb looked at the map, then at the storm layer, then at the old signal meter, trembling like a pulse under glass. They can reach them, he said. Adrienne turned to him. Can they get the heart out in time? Caleb looked through the glass at Nora. Her cardboard radio was still held against her chest, right over her heart. Then he looked back at Adrienne. If they stop wasting seconds, he said. The room moved. Finally, the command floor woke all at once. Not with confidence, with urgency. Dispatchers began routing hospital updates. A flight coordinator opened a direct channel to Charleston Memorial. A nurse called out the transplant team's revised arrival estimate. The rescue helicopter's live feed stuttered across a side monitor, showing rain, gray water, and a red emergency light flashing somewhere beyond the shaking glass of its camera. Adrienne Vale stood in the middle of it, no longer the woman presenting the future to investors. Now she was simply a leader watching the cost of her pride unfold in real time. Rescue 1, the dispatcher said. Palmetto confirms Flight 6 visual. Report survivor status when able. 1. Static. Wind. Rotor noise. Then the rescue pilot answered. We have aircraft down near sandbar edge, nose angled toward water. No fire visible. 1 crew member signaling from hatch. Conditions unstable. A collective breath passed through the room. Alive. They were alive. But the donor heart countdown kept falling. 1 hour, 14 minutes. Caleb remained at the analog panel, one hand on the antenna control, the other near the old radio's dial. The signal had not become easy. It still slipped under waves of static. It still vanished when the storm turned. But Caleb followed it with the patience of someone who knew panic only made hands stupid. Dr. Russell Keene moved toward the primary console, his face tight, with humiliation hidden beneath technical focus. We can lock the recovered position into the digital suite now, he said. I'll force a corrected overlay and let the system calculate the extraction corridor. Caleb heard the word force and looked up. Don't. Keene froze. Excuse me? Don't force the overlay. Keene's voice sharpened. We need digital integration if we want a clean extraction path. You'll bury the live signal again. That is not how this system works. That is exactly how it failed. The room tightened around them. Adrienne turned slowly. Keene's fingers hovered above the keyboard. Miss Vale, with respect, we cannot continue improvising around a maintenance worker's radio instincts. Caleb's face did not change. But Nora, still watching from the hallway, flinched at the words. Caleb saw it in the glass reflection. That was enough. His voice came lower this time, but harder. Dr. Keene, the aircraft is on wet sand, with the tide rising, fuel low, a donor heart losing its window, and 2 medical workers trying to keep a cooler stable in a broken cabin. This is not about your system looking right. Keen opened his mouth. Caleb cut through him. It is about getting them out alive. No one moved. Adrienne looked at Keen's frozen hand above the keyboard, then at Caleb's old radio, then at the live feed where Rescue One's searchlight swept across rain and water. "Step back, Russell," she said. Keen stared at her as if she had struck him. "Adrienne, step back." This time, there was no softness in her voice, no performance, no room for argument. Keen withdrew his hand. The shift was quiet, but everyone felt it. Authority had moved. Not because Caleb had demanded it, because reality had. Caleb turned immediately to the dispatcher. "Tell Rescue One not to land directly beside the aircraft. The sandbar edge is unstable. Have them hover west of the red light and send the basket from the firm side." The dispatcher relayed the instruction. Rescue One replied through heavy static. "Copy. Hover west. Basket deployment." On the side monitor, a blurred shape descended through rain. A rescue basket. A thin line swinging in the storm. The nurse at the rear whispered a prayer. Adrienne's hand rose to her mouth, then stopped halfway, as if even fear had to ask permission to show on her face. Caleb adjusted the antenna again. "Flight 6, he said through the relay. "If you can hear Palmetto, move the heart cooler first, only if the nurse can keep it level. Do not rush the lift. Repeat, do not rush the lift." A broken voice answered. "Copy. Cooler first. Nurse has it." Nora pressed her cardboard radio against the glass. Her lips moved silently. "Please." The live feed shook violently as wind hit the helicopter. The basket spun once, then steadied. A figure in orange rescue gear reached the aircraft hatch. Another figure emerged, bent over something white and rectangular. The heart cooler. The room stopped pretending not to feel. An investor who had mocked Caleb earlier slowly lowered himself into a chair. A technician gripped the console edge. The nurse, who had looked away during Caleb's humiliation, now watched him with wet eyes. Rescue One shouted, "Cooler secure. Lifting now." The basket rose through rain. For 10 endless seconds, it swung between aircraft and helicopter like the whole morning had been reduced to a single fragile thread. Then the rescue pilot came over the speaker. "Palmetto, donor heart is aboard Rescue One." A sob escaped someone in the room. But Caleb did not relax. "Survivors next," he said. One by one, they came. The first nurse. The second nurse. The pilot, injured but conscious. Each confirmation landed like a life returned from the dark. Finally, Rescue One transmitted, "All survivors aboard. Departing for Charleston Memorial. Estimated arrival, 21 minutes." The donor heart countdown read 57 minutes. Enough. Barely. Adrienne looked at Caleb. No speech came. No apology yet. Only a stunned, dawning understanding that the man she had mocked had not saved her company's reputation. He had saved people. Caleb removed his hand from the antenna dial at last. The old radio hissed softly beside him. Then, from a dark corner of the command system, an archived protocol alert appeared on the main monitor. Training method match found. Caleb's name had not appeared yet, but the room was about to learn why his hands had known exactly where to listen. For a moment, no one understood the message on the monitor. Training method match found. It appeared in a small amber box at the corner of the command system, almost hidden beneath weather overlays, rescue updates, and the still blinking donor heart countdown. The room had been so focused on survival that the alert seemed like an afterthought. Then Marisol Avery, the young technician at the backup systems cabinet, leaned closer. "That's from the Emergency Protocol Archive," she said. Dr. Keen turned sharply. "Ignore it. The system is probably cross-referencing outdated material." But his voice had lost its weight. No one moved to close the alert. Adrienne Vale looked at the screen, then at Caleb. He had stepped away from the antenna panel. His old radio hung at his side again, quiet now, except for a low breath of static. He looked tired, not triumphant. The kind of tired that came after holding himself steady while everyone else learned too late what he had known too early. Adrienne spoke carefully. "Open it." Keen's face tightened. "Adrienne, this is not the time for archival clutter." She did not look at him. "Open it." Marisol clicked the alert. The main wall display shifted. A file loaded from deep inside Palmetto AirMed's emergency training database. A sealed module added years earlier when the company had purchased Coast Guard-derived coastal response protocols. The screen showed a grainy still frame from an old training recording. A younger man stood in front of a storm response communications board, wearing a dark Coast Guard training jacket. His hair was shorter, his face was leaner, but the eyes were the same. Quiet, focused, listening before speaking. Nora's hand slowly left the glass. "Daddy?" she whispered. The room heard her. On the monitor, the archived video began to play. "This method is not about chasing the strongest signal," the younger Caleb said through the speakers. "In coastal storms, the strongest signal can be the lie. The real distress call may arrive damaged, delayed, and ugly. Your job is not to trust what looks clean. Your job is to find what is alive." No one breathed comfortably after that. The words had crossed years to accuse the present. Marisol read the file details aloud, her voice nearly breaking. Coast Guard Emergency Communications Training Series, Storm Reflection, Distress Recovery. Lead RF Systems Instructor, Caleb Whitaker. The name appeared across the screen. Caleb Whitaker, Lead RF Systems Instructor, Coastal Disaster Response Communications. A phone rang somewhere near the investor table. No one answered it. Adrienne stared at the monitor, as if the glass had opened beneath her feet. Dr. Keen's polished certainty collapsed in pieces. First, his mouth closed. Then, his shoulders lowered. Then his eyes dropped to the console where his hand had suppressed the duplicate return, the very clue Caleb had warned them not to erase. The video continued. If an operator dismisses a damaged signal because it does not match the system's preferred answer, the younger Caleb said, the operator may become more dangerous than the storm. A technician near the rear console looked down. The nurse who had laughed earlier covered her mouth with trembling fingers. The investor with the coffee cup set it on the table so slowly it made no sound at all. Nora walked into the command floor before anyone stopped her. Her cardboard radio was still tucked against her chest, but now she held it differently. Not like something foolish, not like something to hide, like something that had always belonged beside her father's old receiver. Caleb turned when he heard her small footsteps. Her eyes were wide, not with fear this time, but with the aching realization that children feel when they discover their parents have lived whole lives before them. "You taught them?" she asked. Caleb crouched to her level. "A long time ago," he said. "Why didn't you tell me?" His face softened with a sadness too private for the room. "Because some parts of the past are hard to carry into breakfast." Nora looked at the screen again, then back at him. "But you still knew how." Caleb nodded once. "Some things stay in your hands." Behind them, the rescue helicopter confirmed final approach to Charleston Memorial. The donor heart was still viable. Survivors were alive. The patient waiting under surgical lights still had a chance. Adrienne heard the update, but her eyes stayed on Caleb. Only now did she understand the shape of what had happened. She had not mocked a radio. She had mocked a history of service. She had mocked the hands that trained the very protocols protecting her company. She had mocked a father in front of his daughter because his uniform did not look expensive enough to matter. The archived video froze on the younger Caleb's face. His name remained reflected across the glass wall, and the people who had laughed now had nowhere left to put their eyes. The command floor woke all at once, not with confidence, with urgency. Dispatchers began routing hospital updates. A flight coordinator opened a direct channel to Charleston Memorial. A nurse called out the transplant team's revised arrival estimate. The rescue helicopter's live feed stuttered across a side monitor, showing rain, gray water, and a red emergency light flashing somewhere beyond the shaking glass of its camera. Adrienne Vale stood in the middle of it, no longer the woman presenting the future to investors. Now she was simply a leader, watching the cost of her pride unfold in real time. Rescue 1, the dispatcher said. Palmetto confirms Flight 6 visual. Report survivor status, when able. 1. Static. Wind. Rotor noise. Then the rescue pilot answered. We have aircraft down near sandbar edge, nose angled toward water, no fire visible. One crew member signaling from hatch. Conditions unstable. A collective breath passed through the room. Alive. They were alive. But the donor heart countdown kept falling. 1 hour, 14 minutes. Caleb remained at the analog panel, one hand on the antenna control, the other near the old radio's dial. The signal had not become easy. It still slipped under waves of static. It still vanished when the storm turned. But Caleb followed it with the patience of someone who knew panic only made hands stupid. Dr. Russell Keene moved toward the primary console, his face tight, with humiliation hidden beneath technical focus. We can lock the recovered position into the digital suite now, he said. I'll force a corrected overlay and let the system calculate the extraction corridor. Caleb heard the word force and looked up. Don't. Keene froze. Excuse me? Don't force the overlay. Keene's voice sharpened. We need digital integration if we want a clean extraction path. You'll bury the live signal again. That is not how this system works. That is exactly how it failed. The room tightened around them. Adrienne turned slowly. Keene's fingers hovered above the keyboard. Miss Vale, with respect, we cannot continue improvising around a maintenance worker's radio instincts. Caleb's face did not change. But Nora, still watching from the hallway, flinched at the words. Caleb saw it in the glass reflection. That was enough. His voice came lower this time, but harder. Dr. Keene, the aircraft is on wet sand, with the tide rising, fuel low, a donor heart losing its window, and 2 medical workers trying to keep a cooler stable in a broken cabin. This is not about your system looking right. Keene opened his mouth. Caleb cut through him. It is about getting them out alive. No one moved. Adrienne looked at Keene's frozen hand above the keyboard, then at Caleb's old radio, then at the live feed where Rescue 1's searchlight swept across rain and water. Step back, Russell, she said. Keene stared at her as if she had struck him. Adrienne, step back. This time, there was no softness in her voice, no performance, no room for argument. Keene withdrew his hand. The shift was quiet, but everyone felt it. Authority had moved. Not because Caleb had demanded it, because reality had. Caleb turned immediately to the dispatcher. Tell Rescue 1 not to land directly beside the aircraft. The sandbar edge is unstable. Have them hover west of the red light and send the basket from the firm side. The dispatcher relayed the instruction. Rescue 1 replied through heavy static. Copy. Hover west. Basket deployment. On the side monitor, a blurred shape descended through rain. A rescue basket. A thin line swinging in the storm. The nurse at the rear whispered a prayer. Adrienne's hand rose to her mouth, then stopped halfway, as if even fear had to ask permission to show on her face. Caleb adjusted the antenna again. Flight 6, he said through the relay. If you can hear Palmetto, move the heart cooler first, only if the nurse can keep it level. Do not rush the lift. Repeat, do not rush the lift. A broken voice answered. Copy. Cooler first. Nurse has it. Nora pressed her cardboard radio against the glass. Her lips moved silently. Please. The live feed shook violently as wind hit the helicopter. The basket spun once, then steadied. A figure in orange rescue gear reached the aircraft hatch. Another figure emerged, bent over something white and rectangular. The heart cooler. The room stopped pretending not to feel. An investor who had mocked Caleb earlier slowly lowered himself into a chair. A technician gripped the console edge. The nurse, who had looked away during Caleb's humiliation, now watched him with wet eyes. Rescue 1 shouted, "Cooler secure. Lifting now." The basket rose through rain. For 10 endless seconds, It swung between aircraft and helicopter, like the whole morning had been reduced to a single fragile thread. Then the rescue pilot came over the speaker. "Palmetto, donor heart is aboard Rescue 1. A sob escaped someone in the room. But Caleb did not relax. "Survivors next," he said. One by one, they came. The first nurse. The second nurse. The pilot, injured but conscious. Each confirmation landed like a life returned from the dark. Finally, Rescue 1 transmitted. All survivors aboard. Departing for Charleston Memorial. Estimated arrival, 21 minutes. The donor heart countdown read 57 minutes. Enough. Barely. Adrienne looked at Caleb. No speech came. No apology yet. Only a stunned, dawning understanding that the man she had mocked had not saved her company's reputation. He had saved people. Caleb removed his hand from the antenna dial at last. The old radio hissed softly beside him. Then, from a dark corner of the command system, an archived protocol alert appeared on the main monitor. Training method match found. Caleb's name had not appeared yet, but the room was about to learn why his hands had known exactly where to listen. By late afternoon, the storm began to loosen its grip on Charleston. Rain still moved across the windows of Palmetto AirMed Logistics, but the violence had gone out of it. The harbor slowly reappeared beyond the glass, gray and trembling beneath a sky that looked exhausted from its own anger. Medical Flight 6 had been recovered. The pilot was in stable condition. Both nurses had survived. And at Charleston Memorial, a patient who had spent the morning waiting beneath surgical lights now had a new heartbeat because a man with an old radio had refused to stop listening. But inside the command floor, the rescue had left behind another kind of emergency. The kind no machine could solve. Adrienne Vale stood beside the main conference table with Caleb Whitaker across from her. The investors remained nearby, quieter now, their contract folders unopened. Dr. Russell Keene stood at the far edge of the room, stripped of certainty. Nora sat in a chair near her father, her cardboard radio resting carefully on her knees. No one had asked her to leave. That mattered. Adrienne looked different without performance. Still elegant, still powerful, but less polished around the edges, as if fear and shame had worn through the surface and found something human underneath. "I spoke with Charleston Memorial," she said. "The patient is out of surgery. Critical, but stable." Nora looked up quickly. Caleb closed his eyes for one brief second. Then he nodded. Good. Only one word. But it carried the whole day. Adrienne folded her hands in front of her. "Mr. Whitaker, I cannot undo what I said this morning." "No," Caleb replied quietly. "You can't." The honesty settled between them. Adrienne accepted it. "But I can decide what this company becomes after it," she said. "And I can start by saying publicly that Palmetto AirMed failed today before you stepped in. Not because the equipment was worthless, because we were arrogant enough to ignore the person who understood what it was missing." Dr. Keene looked down. Adrienne continued, her voice steady but humbled. "I want to offer you a senior emergency communications role, full authority to rebuild our backup response training, full compensation, public recognition for what you did." A few hours earlier, such an offer would have sounded like a crown being lowered onto a man's head. Now it sounded smaller than the choice Caleb had already made. He looked at Nora. She was watching him with wide, careful eyes, still holding the cardboard radio. Caleb knew that look. She was not asking whether they would be rich now. She was asking what kind of man he would be after the world finally noticed him. He turned back to Adrienne. "I'll consider the role," he said, "on conditions." Adrienne nodded immediately. "Name them." "Every employee gets emergency listening training. Not just pilots, not just senior operators. Maintenance, security, dispatch, ground crew, nurses, everyone." Adrienne did not interrupt. "Second," Caleb said, "no one in this building gets treated like they are invisible because of the uniform they wear." The words moved through the room like a slow tide. A security officer near the door lifted his eyes. Marisol Avery smiled faintly through tears. "Third," Caleb said, his voice softening, "my schedule stays built around my daughter. Nora looked down at the radio in her lap. Adrienne's face changed. Perhaps that condition taught her the most. Caleb was not negotiating for status first, not for a title, not for a corner office, not for the chance to stand above those who had stood above him. He was negotiating for dignity, for safety, for fatherhood. Adrienne nodded. Agreed. Caleb studied her for a moment, making sure the answer had weight. Then he extended his hand. Adrienne took it. There was no applause. There did not need to be. Across the room, Dr. Keene stepped forward. He stopped near Caleb, struggling with words that did not come easily to men used to certainty. I dismissed you, Keene said, and people almost died because I wanted the system to prove me right. Caleb looked at him. Keene swallowed. I'm sorry. Caleb held his gaze, then gave one small nod. Not forgiveness wrapped in performance. Not punishment. Just acknowledgement. By sunrise the next morning, Charleston Harbor lay calm beneath pale gold light. Caleb and Nora sat on the end of an old wooden pier before school. Their jackets zipped against the cool air. The city behind them was waking slowly. Gulls moved above the water. Far in the distance, a rescue helicopter crossed the sky, small and bright against the morning. Between them sat two radios. One scratched black receiver with a cracked leather strap. One hand-painted cardboard radio with smudged silver letters. Nora turned the paper dial on hers and leaned close, pretending to listen. Caleb smiled. Hear anything? She nodded seriously. A signal. What does it say? Nora looked at him, then out toward the water. It says you came home. Caleb's smile faded into something deeper. He put one arm around his daughter and pulled her close. The old radio stayed quiet beside them. For once, there was no emergency in the static. No voice fighting through darkness. No storm bending truth into echoes. Only water, morning, a father, a child, and the quiet dignity of a man who had never needed the world to call him important in order to know what mattered. What would you have done if you were standing in that command floor? Would you have trusted Caleb Whitaker before the screen revealed who he used to be? Or would you have looked at his maintenance shirt, his old radio, his quiet voice, and assumed he had nothing important to offer? That is the question this story leaves behind. Because Caleb did not become valuable when the archive showed his name, he was already valuable when he walked those halls before sunrise. He was already valuable when he fixed things no one noticed. He was already valuable when he packed Nora's school project into his old truck and tried to protect her from a world too quick to laugh at humble people. The truth is, many people are judged before they ever speak. By their job, by their clothes, by their income, by the old things they carry, by the quiet way they move through places built for people with louder titles. Adrienne Vale believed she was looking at a maintenance worker with outdated equipment, but what she was really looking at was a father who had chosen presence over prestige, a man who had once trained experts to listen through storms, then stepped away from recognition because his little girl needed him more than the world needed to applaud him. And that is what makes Caleb's victory so powerful. He did not save Flight 6 to embarrass the people who mocked him. He did not expose Dr. Keene to enjoy his downfall. He did not accept Adrienne's apology as a trophy. He simply did what needed to be done because lives were at risk, because a child was watching, and because dignity means doing the right thing even when the wrong people are laughing. Nora's cardboard radio may not have picked up a real frequency, but in many ways it heard the most important signal of all. It heard her father's character. It heard his restraint. It heard the quiet promise he had been keeping all along, that no insult would make him smaller and no recognition would make him forget what mattered. So now we want to hear from you. What did you think of Caleb? Was his silence a sign of weakness, or was it the strongest part of him? Do you think Adrienne truly changed by the end, or did she only begin to understand the damage caused by arrogance? And have you ever seen someone underestimated because of their job, their appearance, or the way they quietly carried themselves? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story may be exactly what someone else needs to read today. If this story moved you, Please give it a like so more people can find it. Subscribe for more emotional stories about hidden strength, fatherhood, dignity, and the quiet people who prove their worth when the world least expects it. And before you go, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. Somewhere, someone else is listening in the dark.